the bench right now. We've got Britt Barnes and Billy Salyers, who are both Forge and Fire contestants, not just contestants, but actual winners from the show. They messaged me through the Forge and Fire fan page or fan group, and they said, you know, we can definitely do this for you, and we can duet. So I thought, damn, we can get 2 Forge and Fire chants for the one stream. This is our final presenters, except for the last bit of information at the end, where we're going to be sharing the rules and evaluation procedure for the blacksmith challenge after this. So I'm gonna swap over to Britt and Billy. I see them kind of shuffling around their shop.
You said they're gonna do. What are they doing?
I'm not sure. We're gonna chat with them like we've been chatting with everyone else.
They said they're gonna do something though. They're gonna do
duets. They're together.
It? Oh, what's it? What's it that they're doing? Doing it? Doing it? What's it?
You gotta watch and find out.
Let's see what's up.
All right. So I asked them to unmute. Guys, you might have to click on your phone or device there. Awesome.
Oh, still muted.
Still, yeah, guys, you guys are. No, you should be able to hear you.
Why can't we hear you?
I don't know.
Technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties.
Might have had, there's 2 audio options to choose from sometimes. You might have had to choose the other one possibly.
Yeah, on the bottom left of your screen, you have the mute button, and there's a little arrow there where you can select different audio options. Oh, heard a click.
That was me, sorry.
I'll share my screen, maybe.
Do you have that video, Justin? Can you run that real quick? Oh, close that, close that, close it. Nothing to see there.
No, I don't have it, Lyndon. I only have it on my phone. Sorry, bud.
Shoot.
But
can you give me the ability to screen share? I'll play it real quick. I think. Oh no, wait, I don't have it on. It's on my phone too, son of. No, I can get it on my computer.
All right, if you can get it, then we'll.
If I can get it before.
For a bit.
Okay, how's that? Can you? How's that microphone? Is that
yeah,
better?
You got it, brother. You're good.
Now we can't hear them.
Yeah.
Is that better? It's on mic now.
Yeah.
All right, excellent.
All right,
I just swapped out microphones.
Oh, good stuff. All right. So I gave the rough introduction, but why don't you guys kind of give us a bit of background on who you are and what brings us here today?
I'm in Billy's shop, so all the work to Billy. I was going to divert to you.
No. First of all, welcome to Yellow Rose Forge. This is my shop. Britt runs Britt Barnes Knives. He's about 2 hours up the road from us.
About an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah. Britt and I are both season 7 champions. Britt was from the First Responders episode where they made the Halligan breach tool, and I was from the military tribute episode with the Scottish backsword. So Britt and I became friends after connecting online. I think probably before either of our episodes aired. I don't remember exactly. I called you up. I accidentally dialed you up on Facebook to tell you congratulations after watching your episode.
Yeah, well, we'd actually met, but didn't meet.
Yeah.
At the ABS Hammer in Haywood County, Clyde, North Carolina. We'd actually met that didn't meet.
And so I had invited Britt to join a network of guys that I admin called Redeemed Steel, which are craftsmen who use the tools and the skills that they have to share their faith. And so Robert Soria, the other Smith in the finals of my episode of Forged in Fire, helped start that network. And now we've got something like 80 Smiths worldwide. We raise money for missions and do all kinds of good stuff using knife making as a tool.
Very cool.
My background is I was in the first responders episode. I was a federal law enforcement agent for 30 years, retired. Started making knives about 2 years before I retired, 2 or 3 years before I retired. Actually got to meet, it was kind of weird. I was watching a YouTube episode and watched Jason Knight do something, and the guy said they were in South Carolina. I didn't know what the ABS was. I didn't know what a bladesmith was. I was watching some YouTube videos, found a Jason Knight video, found out he was 30 miles from me, called him up, asked him about where to learn to make knives. Long story short, about 6 weeks later, I was in his shop. He taught me to make knives about 6 years ago at Jason's shop. Jason went on to be a short-time judge on the show, but is a fantastic bladesmith. If you're a knife collector, everybody knows who Jason Knight is. And that's who actually taught me to make knives.
I got started as a project with my kids. Every year I do some kind of project with my kids to learn new skills, things like that. We the first year we got some 1/4-inch plywood and some tarp, made a sailboat, took it out on the lake, had a blast. Then we made a little aluminum foundry. One year we built an arcade machine. We started raising chickens. And then one year we built combat robots. And we ran out of project before we ran out of summer. So we had these robots finished. We had about a month left of summer. So I had my grandfather's anvil, which is sitting right over here. It's an 1877 Fisher anvil. I had some of my grandfather's tools, and so we said, well, let's make a knife and you know, make a little forge and make a knife. And so I did that with my kids, and we just fell in love with it. And we started doing it probably 20 to 30 hours a week. And after doing that for about 3 weeks, somebody told us, you know, hey, have you ever heard of this thing called Forged in Fire? And we're like, no, what is it? There's this TV show. You got to check it out. So we started watching it. At the time, funny you mentioned Jason, I was forging my first sword, which was a Roman gladius, and ran into Jason at the Big Blue Power Hammer. They do a hammer in there every year. And Jason saw that I had this sword with me. He goes, hey, is that a gladius? Let me check it out. And of course, me at that point, I'm just kind of geeking out. Show it to him, got talking to him, met some incredible smiths, and just kind of, you know, through some encouragements from some other people, just kind of stuck it out with the craft until, you know, now I've been an English professor for the past, I don't know, 10 years or so. And now it's turned into my full-time job. I stopped teaching full-time, and now I make knives for a living. So it's been kind of an incredible journey from what started in a one-car garage with my kids to now, you know, a 1,500 square foot shop where I come out here and make knives 40 hours a week.
Yeah, that's incredible, guys.
No, I do a lot more than 40 hours a week, but it sounds better. Say 40.
I wish I could work 40 hours a week.
No kidding. And I see that your shop looks fairly new. When did you build this?
This building here has been here for about 3 years now, something like that. I built this about a year before I did my episode.
Okay.
Something like that. So it may look new, but that's only because you're seeing above the floor. If you looked at the floor, you'd see just how much age is in this building.
Nice.
This is Saka. He's the real star of the show, by the way.
Nice. I see Lyndon has his dog there too.
Everybody's got to have a shop dog.
Absolutely. Wouldn't be a complete shop without one.
Awesome. Awesome. Lyndon, get in on here. You're great at asking questions. I'm kind of slow with this stuff. Oh, no audio.
a little backstory on the show. I actually had a connection to the show that I had to disclose. That's part of the thing when you're applying to the show. Says, you know, do you do any business with the show? I've actually supplied the show with steel for well, ever since the show started. We sell the 1085 1-inch round bar, and you'll see it make quite a few appearances on the show. They call it 1084. We call it 1085. But everybody knows 1084 and they don't know 1085. So we actually supply this, have been supplying this to the show since it started.
Which is kind of funny because I recognized that steel on my episode. My episode was the episode where you had to dismantle the tank and do a sand my blade using the tank treads and we used the handrails on the tank. And I recognized that they had chopped up some of that steel and made the handrails on that episode. And so that was the high carbon component of my particular blade. This is, I use that steel all the time. This is actually a work in progress. Let me get close to the camera. It makes really good integral bolster chef's knives. So because it's 1 inch round, you can forge your knife out of it. Makes for a really, really pretty chef's knife when you get done with it. So, but it was just kind of really cool that I didn't know that Britt sold that steel to the show at the time, but I did recognize it. And then when I found out that that the steel that I'd been buying this whole time was coming from Britt, I just started getting it directly from him now. So
very cool. And with the tools that you guys have in the background here, I see you guys have a press and a power hammer.
Yeah.
How was it dealing to get these products into your shop? I know that for myself, I'm kind of a residential area and I'm kind of weary of getting these things in, but maybe you can give us some insight on maybe some of the noise levels and even the process of getting them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, full disclosure, Forged and Fire Champions do get a discount with Big Blue Power Hammer. I'm not sponsored by them at all, but if you call them up and tell them that you've done the show, I think it's something like a 5% discount, which for a press ends up being about $500 that it saves you, which is pretty awesome. Yeah. But the company that manufactures these is about an hour up the road from me. So when I ordered my press and my power hammer, I called them up, placed the order. They loaded them on the back of a trailer, drove them to my shop themselves, and helped me unload them and place them in the shop. They're just really, really cool people. So, you know, give Andy a shout out at Big Blue if you ever get a chance, because he's an amazing guy. And one of the things that I really liked about it, and one of the reasons I decided on these tools, was not just because they were a close company, but because when I called them and was asking questions about it, they invited me to come to their facility where they manufacture them and try them out, spend the day up there letting them teach me how to use the tools before I ever committed to buying one. And so I got to play with it. I ended up going with a middle of the road power hammer. They make a 65, a 110, and a 155. And for me, for what I do, the benefit of getting the bigger hammer and needing a slightly bigger compressor was just outweighed by what I had and what I needed. But you asked about noise levels. The press makes next to no noise at all. I mean, it's, as far as shop tools, it's whisper quiet. It's on wheels, so you can roll it around the shop. It's got like a 20-foot power cable. As long as you got a 220 outlet, you can kind of roll it around. I keep it in the corner of the shop because I don't need it anywhere else. And I've got a rack of different dies and tooling that I made for it. Some that I bought, but most that I made. So I can swap those out, and it's just a really convenient tool. It took my Damascus making process from something that took around 10 hours to around 4 hours. So it cut that process in almost half of the time. The power hammer, on the other hand, is a different story altogether as far as noise levels.
Different animal.
Yeah. So I have an unspoken deal with my neighbors, and I haven't told them this, but so far this is what I've done, and I haven't had any issues at all. I don't run the power hammer before 9 a.m. or after 9 p.m. So I wait till everybody else has gone to work, and then I stop before everybody else goes to bed. Now, thankfully, I kind of live out in the country, and I've only got one really close neighbor, but I've got another neighbor maybe 150, 200 yards down the road, and they can hear the power hammer when I'm running it, but it's not overly disruptive. The way that I've got mine set up, and this is a cool thing. If you're watching the show, take a look at this and see if you can spot it, because I didn't spot it until I saw it on set. This power hammer is pneumatic. It runs off of air. So you've got 150 PSI coming in, and that operates the valve going up and down, and then it exhausts that air out of a line that comes out of the bottom of the hammer, and mine runs outside. So most of the noise from my power hammer, other than the impact, is the exhaust going outside. And to that effect, I'll actually turn it on. So, and in this case, that's all the noise you get from it inside, other than the impact of it hitting the steel. All the noise from the air is going through a pipe that goes outside of my building and out into my backyard. The power hammer they have set up on the show, at least when I was there, had a muffler on it, like literally like a tractor trailer muffler coming up off the side, like a big smokestack, and they're venting it up through that muffler to silence it on the show, because if you had all that air exhausting out of the power hammer, it would just make the set that much louder. So just a cool little thing, if you're watching the show, look for the muffler on the power hammer. But yeah, as far as noise level, it's really the impact, and you heard it when I turned it on. That's what makes the noise. The tools themselves are whisper quiet. They're great tools too, by the way.
What size of compressor are you running for that?
I am running an 80-gallon 5-horsepower compressor there. My compressor is 100% duty cycle, so it can actually feed air as fast as the power hammer consumes it. And I run it at 150 PSI off of an 80-gallon tank.
I will say this, when I started, I was actually in Charleston, South Carolina, and I had a shop in a residential neighborhood. And it's not so much that your neighbors hear the power hammer. My next door neighbor would feel it in the foundation of his house.
Oh, wow.
He would come over and he'd go, "What are you doing? What are you making?" And because I can feel my floor, you can feel the floor hitting. But if you're in a residential neighborhood, I concur with Billy 100%. If you can only buy one tool, buy a press.
Absolutely.
It'll do just about everything that a power hammer will do. The big difference is it's going to suck a little more heat out. The power hammer is an impact tool, and it doesn't suck as much heat out of your work, and you'll get more work done in one heat. But for noise abatement, you cannot beat the press. You can do just about everything you can do with a power hammer with a press, and it's not as loud.
And you don't need a compressor, which
Correct.
Also generates a lot of noise.
Correct.
So with the power hammer, you have to have a compressor. The press, as long as you've got an outlet that'll support it, all you need is electricity. So it's an amazing tool. I started with the power hammer. Actually, I started with a press, but I built a press out of a 16-ton log splitter. And that worked fine for the time. Then I bought the power hammer. The power hammer paid for itself within a couple of months. And then after I got the power hammer, I broke my other press a couple of times. It couldn't hold up to the kind of abuse I was putting it through. And so then I bought the Big Blue and questioned why I ever lived without it. It paid for itself in about 3 months.
That's kind of me. After I got my press, I always wonder how did I ever get by without this thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you start squeezing and making Damascus, and you can make Damascus very, very quickly with a press.
Absolutely. I think you can go. I think the most aggressive I've done is maybe a 4.5 inch block of Damascus, and reduced it maybe to about 1.5 inches in a single heat.
Holy crap!
Yeah, it's pretty impressive what you can do with one of these things.
What size of motor is on that?
The press is I believe it's a 7.5 horsepower motor. It's pretty massive. If you can, I don't know if you guys can see it, but this whole area here is devoted to motor and tank. It's about 16 gallons of hydraulic fluid, and the rest of that space is motor.
Holy.
Yeah.
That's a 50-ton press, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of tonnage.
It is, and oh boy, it's fun to use too. That was my one regret as far as the tooling on the show. I never actually got to use the press. I forged my knife for round one almost exclusively on the power hammer and on my anvil. I didn't really do anything else. So I never touched the press, and I really wanted to use it because I was, at the time, I was thinking about getting an Uncle Al's, and I've heard good things about them. But I ended up going with the Big Blue. Like I said, they're an hour away. I'll tell you one of the things they did for me. I was a little over aggressive in setting up a ladder pattern Damascus, and ended up jamming a set of dies together so that the fingers and some ladder dies actually wedged together, and 50 tons pushing them together, they were inseparable. So I literally just took them up to Blue. They stuck them on a 70-ton press, popped them apart, and Bob's your uncle fixed everything that I had screwed up and didn't charge me a penny for it. They're really great people.
Are they pretty close to you then, I guess? Or
I can be there in an hour. Yeah, I mean, they really are right up the road.
That's awesome.
there's a shop here in Winnipeg that I've visited a few times. My neighbor's the blacksmith there, and they're exclusively using Big Blue for the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years. They've had that stuff going on in there. They're a spring shop, and they do springs for heavy duty vehicles all over Manitoba. They get guys coming in there, and they swear by their Big Blues that it's the best produced machinery out there.
It really is, and for the price, you can't beat it. I mean, I looked into, because I'm a DIY guy. If you look around my shop, there are very few tools in here that are actually purchased. You know, my bandsaw, my power hammer, my press, and one of my heat treating ovens. Everything else, even my grinders, I build myself. You know, most of the stuff that I have in this shop is either old, refurbished, or absolutely 100% made by hand. And so I looked at building a power hammer. It's not outside of the scope of my skill set to do so. But by the time I factored in about $3,000 worth of material cost, probably plus at least 100 hours of work, it just made sense to buy one. In that amount of time, I could have literally gone and got a part-time job at McDonald's and paid most of it. So why not, you know, spend the money and then use that time. I figured the time I could be spending building a hammer, I could spend making knives using the hammer and let the knives pay for the hammer. And that's what I did. And like I said, it only took a couple months and it paid for itself.
I was very tempted to take a side job at McDonald's instead of building a hammer, but I decided I'm going to build a hammer, and I'm partway through building a tire hammer. This is the frame for it. This is the anvil right here. So
awesome. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I also teach at the Trine Arts and Crafts School, and I've got one of the first Clay Spencer tire hammers over there, made by another knife maker, a friend of mine named Jerry Drew, and he made that, I think, with clay. And those tire hammers are tremendous tools. I value these because, you know, when I'm doing a block of Damascus, it's not uncommon for me to start with 5 or even 10-pound blocks of material, and I want to be able to work that fairly quickly. But if I was just doing, you know, smaller stuff, you know, even, you know, 2 or 3 pound blocks, you can do that on a tire hammer with a 25-pound head, no problem.
Funny story about the Clay Spencer tire hammer is the original Clay Spencer tire hammer resides here in Winnipeg at Cloverdale Forge. It's owned by Matt Jenkins and Rudy at their forge there. Rudy worked with Clay Spencer back in want to say the early 90s, maybe it was even the 80s, when Clay Spencer was first designing and building the power hammer. He was working at NASA still at the time, if I'm not mistaken.
I understand he was an engineer for NASA and actually drew the plans for that thing out on a napkin in a restaurant, as I understand it.
Yeah, and the parts that are on this tire hammer in Winnipeg here that Rudy owns are some of the parts are actually NASA parts.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
That's really cool.
And so, what's the chance that you'd be willing to show us some of these dies that you've got for your press?
Plenty. I'll grab a few sets. You want to grab some of it?
Yeah. All right, these are ladder dies for making ladder pattern Damascus.
All right. So,
Do those get locked into the press in any sort of way, or do you just put them on?
They have a latch plate on them.
I'll hopefully I can demonstrate from over here. So it's really, really simple to change these. So the top die, there's literally just a little switch you pull and the die just slides out.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then you slide a new one in and then drop the pin. The bottom die has 2 retention pins. You pull those out, hang them on a little hook, and then just lift the bottom die out.
Oh my gosh, that's dreamy.
And then you
love it.
Put your retention pins back in. It's so fast. You can change them in between heats. I can do, one heat, switch dies to a different one, and I'll often do that. When I'm drawing out Damascus, this is a drawing die, and so this pinches the steel in between 2 pieces like this and draws it out perpendicular to this line. And so I'll often rotate between flat dies and drawing dies to really kind of aggressively draw out that steel.
Right.
Let's grab a couple more.
You got 3 square dies for your cans. They'll recognize those to show.
Yep. There's some round. So this is a fairly heavy duty set of squaring dies. So this is for canister Damascus. So this is set up to convert a 2-inch can into a 1.5-inch square bar. So when I'm setting up canister Damascus, I put it in here. And this is literally, these pieces are 2-inch square solid stock, welded, supported by angle iron, and welded to 1/2-inch plate. So they're really heavy. I mean, this probably weighs about 30 pounds for these 2 dies right here. And then the ones that Britt's got, those are for
Twist, no?
turning stock into round bar.
Damn.
I use mine for when I'm doing twist Damascus. I'll make the bar square and then make it round in the center. That way I don't have as many liability or chances of cold shuts when you're twisting the Damascus, so I'll make it round.
Nice.
Another thing that's really good for is I actually use that set of dies to make a 14th century rondelle dagger. And so I took a twist bar of Damascus, forged it round, and because that dagger has 3 sides, it's a triangular blade profile, I needed to start with round stock. So this is great for when you want to take something that's square or rectangular or octagonal or whatever and turn it into round bar to make it easier to forge into something else. 90% of forge work is understanding what the different work surfaces do and how those work surfaces can shape the steel into something else.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I do at my shop, as you can see, I've got anvils everywhere back here. And at least once a month, I teach a basic bladesmithing class. And so one of the things that I teach people is how the horn versus the shelf versus the face versus the wheel versus the corners, how all those different surfaces change the dynamic in the way that the metal moves. And if you understand how the surfaces of the anvil work, you can move the metal in very specific ways to save yourself a lot of time on the grinder. I mean, I know some guys that really, really like, you know, stock removal and stuff like that, but I don't know a lot of smiths who really enjoy forging, who would rather spend their time in the grinding room. And the less grinding that I have to do, the more time I can spend playing with fire and hammers.
Nice.
I agree. And that's the general rule of bladesmithing is 10 minutes in the forge will save you 20 minutes on the grinder.
Absolutely.
Nice. Now, are both of you then running any production lines of knives, or are you guys mostly doing custom work?
I'll let you go first. Because mine's iffy on what we mean by production. But
Yeah. I have a couple of production knives that I do. They're all one-offs. They started as a one-off and became so popular, they're now a production. Matter of fact, I've got 5 of them on the bench at the shop, and I don't make them in big batches, but they are a production knife. It's kind of a standard stock thing that I do. And I have three designs that are kind of a production, what I would call a production knife. Everything else is one-off custom.
Most of the work that I do, 90% of the work that I do is absolutely one-off custom. People call me, tell me what they want, I make it, and then they get it. And so it's kind of funny because a lot of the work that I get, I'll post a picture of something that somebody made, somebody will go, how much? And I go, well, this is already sold. You know, I'm just posting pictures of a completed project. And I say, but I'll be glad to make you one. And then I never hear back from them. I mean, I think most knife makers experience that quite a bit. But one of the things that I do make, and I don't have any finished, but I'll show you one in progress, is I actually do a lot of work with a lot of ministry groups. And so I've got a little 3-inch drop point hunter that I make, and I make these in batches of 25. And so what I do is I sell them to them for about half the price I would sell them retail if I were selling them. And then they in turn sell them at a markup and use that money to raise funds for their mission organization. And so this is the closest thing I've got to a production knife. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll laser etch their logo onto the blade along with my logo, and then I'll put a serial number on it. And that's just a way for me to kind of take what I'm doing. I don't make as much doing them this way, but I get to support some good causes by doing it that way. So everything else is pretty much, you know, I forge it after you order it, and I make them in the order that people order them. And typically, it takes about 8 weeks to get a knife from me. If you order it, you should expect a couple of months before I can finish it, because I try to finish them in the order that people call me.
Yeah. And how do you both go about deciding on the pricing that you charge for a knife like that? Or like, not just necessarily your small ones, but your custom ones. Like, I keep hearing this question and a million answers.
Yeah. In fact, Billy and I fight over this on the rig.
Brett fusses at me because he tells me that I need to be charging more. I've seen his work. I think he could be charging more too.
I have a shop. Basically, I have a shop rate of X number of dollars an hour is how I price my stuff. The standard fee is the Shangri-La for a crafts person is like $45 an hour. So if you set that as your shop rate, and that covers your electricity, your consumables, propane, grinding belts, steel, and if it takes 10 hours to make a knife, that knife's $450. If you want presidential grade curly koa, which the wood costs me $100, it adds $100 to the knife.
Right.
If it's like a really complex, like an integral chef's knife, that's a very complex build. There's a lot of geometries that go into it to make it right and to keep it centered. It's not an easy build. I make a lot of chef's knives. To forge out a full tank chef's knife is easy. I've done it, and I can make a chef's knife in 40 minutes on a forge. But to get the integrals, there's a lot more work to keep everything centered and to do everything right. And so that just adds to the cost, the difficulty of the knife, the materials involved. if you want it out of Damascus, that adds $200 to the knife. 'Cause it takes a day to make the steel. I got to cover that time.
It's funny. I made an integral full tang chef's knife last week. That was a beast.
Oh, I bet it was.
Oh my goodness! Because trying to it wasn't the integral part. It was the full tang integral, because trying to get the handle skills to match up to the back of that while still having the tapered tang. That was a nightmare.
Adam DeRozier nails it. He forges a guard. He starts a massive block of steel, forges the guard in, then forges the blade.
Wow.
It's just amazing.
That's
amazing. The guy does amazing work.
My pricing structure is a little bit different. I'll tell you, the first knife that I ever remember selling, I sold for $75, and I thought I thought I was ripping them off. And now that I go back and look at that knife, I probably was. But they still treasure it. They love that knife. So if it's worth it to them, it's worth it to me. Britt and I both live in fairly impoverished neighborhoods. And so one of the things that I do, I sell knives that range anywhere from $100 or $125 all the way up to, swords that start at $1,200 plus. And a lot of the same things that Britt's talking about really factor into that. I take into account, okay, what have I charged for this knife in the past? What have people been willing to pay for? It's also something to consider. But then I think about, okay, how much time do I have in this blade? What is my time worth? If I'm spending, I'll use a sword, for example. One of the last swords that I sold, I think I sold for about $1,200. And I had 35 hours of working on that sword exclusively. Nothing, that doesn't include any of my time, materials, anything else like that. And so that was an entire week's worth of work. And probably $100 worth of propane, probably $100 worth of abrasives, certainly $100 worth of steel. So by the time I ended up selling a sword for $1,200, I might have cleared $800, and I had 40 hours invested in it. So I'm making $20 an hour, which is
exactly how you gotta have to figure this out. Okay, my time per hour, and pricing is hard. I remember my first blade show. I had 8 or 10 knives on the table, and people pick them up, talking about how nice they were, and they go, I had the prices on. They go, oh, that's cool, and they sit there and walk away. And I happen to be Forged and Fire Champion Season 1, Episode 1, Matthew Parkinson, standing right behind me, and I was kind of talking to him about it. And he goes, up your price is $100, and I sold 4 knives in 30 minutes. Huh. So there's this conception it's kind of weird. If your price is too low, the customer doesn't think the quality is there. It's kind of weird. And if you just raise your price, you'd be surprised how fast stuff will sell. Because you want $500 for this, it's got to be, the quality's got to be there. And so it's hard.
I had a customer come in about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I didn't get a chance to show you this knife. I'll have to show you the pictures of it. It's a really cool piece. I haven't posted it online at all yet, but kind of a kukri machete style with the big recurve and the big belly in the blade. I put a D guard on this one, and the handle material was actually made out of the original teak decking of the USS North Carolina battleship.
You had the wood here the last time I was here.
Yeah.
The wood, yeah.
And so it's gorgeous knife. I ended up calling the knife the battleship. But when the customer came into the shop, I drew it out for him, and he said, how much would you make this knife for? And I told him the price, and I'll just tell you guys. I said, well, this is a big knife, $400. And his eyes got really, really big, and he said, is that all?
Yeah.
Does that cover everything? He thought that was a deposit.
Yeah.
So that's it. And so he goes, how about this? How about we make it 500, and I'll get one of your son's roses that he's using for his mission trip. So the guy actually wanted to pay me more than that because he recognized the quality of what I was doing. There's 2 ways for a blacksmith to go out of business. One is to hit cold metal, and the other is to underprice your work. So you need to learn how to value what it is that you're doing. Knives that I sell now for $350 or $450, a year ago I was selling for 150 bucks. But what I began to realize is that my time, my skill, and the quality of my work is worth a lot more, and I actually sell more of them at a higher price. But I still offer a knife for 125 bucks, and I always have something in that $100, $125 range, because where I live, like I said, I live in a pretty poor county. I always want to make sure that somebody who's finance conscious can afford to buy one of my blades. I mean, my mailman has bought 3 or 4, and every now and then she'll just come by and she'll go, I need to buy a knife for a present for somebody. And I've never upped the price for her, because I know what she can afford, and I know, what she can do. And so I always sell her that same knife. But at the same time, I can probably make that knife in an hour. Yeah. So it's not my nicest high-end blade, but it's still a blade. And everything that I do, whether it's a $100 knife or a $1,000 knife, I still guarantee it for life. Yeah. I stand behind everything. Same quality, no matter what you're paying for it.
Yeah, and two, one of my production knives, well, three of my production knives, they're stock removal knives, because and I've tried really hard, and I've actually gotten pretty good. One of my production designs is an all forged blade, and I've got forging them down to about 30 minutes. And I can forge it in 30 minutes, grind it in 20 minutes. But then you go. Billy and I both like to do different finishes: stone wash, media blast, rust bluing. I'm wanting to get a hot bluing. I'm wanting to get into parkerizing. That stuff costs money. A parkerizing setup costs about $500 just to get started. To get all the stuff to go with it, the chemicals and the heaters and the tin and all this other stuff. And so when you start adding finishes in it, and so it all that plays into the price.
Handle materials.
Oh, good Lord.
I put out 2 knives last week. It's a new design for me. I'm hoping it's going to be a production blade, the Carolina Cutters.
Yeah, I like those.
Those are cool knives. They were fun to make too. But one of them had a snakewood handle. The other one had a cocobolo handle. Now, a knife handle, a blank, is about, for those knives, 1.5 inches by 1 inch by 5 inches. So you're looking at 7 cubic inches of material, give or take. So a board foot of that material is about 144 cubic inches. So it's 1/7 of one board foot roughly for that knife. That snakewood cost me $25 for that 7 cubic inches. So it's almost $500 a board foot. So the size of one of your bathroom tiles for that piece of wood would have been $500. The cocobolo is about $120 a board foot, $110, $120. So the really nice, high quality handle materials can be outrageously expensive.
Oh, and getting it, ring gidgee, Tasmanian blackwood, those all come from Australia, New Zealand. Getting them here to the U.S. I got ripped off a couple of years ago. I bought $300 worth of Tasmanian blackwood off a guy on Facebook, and never got it.
And then there's some materials. I'll show you a piece I've got here. This is all I've got of this. Now, I didn't pay a dime for this piece of wood. One of my students gave me this, and this is a 200-year-old piece of cedar of Lebanon from a tree planted in Greenville, South Carolina, in a cemetery in 1802.
Oh, cool.
So what's that piece of wood worth? All right, I've got enough here to make maybe 10 knives, and then this piece of wood is gone forever.
Well, so, just like that USS North Carolina teak wood deck. How much of that wood's left laying around?
Yeah, I've got 4 pieces this big of that teak wood decking. That's it. Sure. So I mean, you think about how much.
When it's gone, it's gone. That's a World War II battleship. When it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah. So you could say that the value in that is insurmountable. Really, to the right person, that could be worth $1 million.
Well, please introduce us to that person.
Yeah. Now, when I find them, I'm going to keep that secret to myself. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I know a guy that, and I won't mention his name, but I mean, he that's his shtick. He's a history teacher. He goes all over the country and buys, like, constitutional, a tree that was on the ground when they signed the Constitution. He has parts of that tree. This is a Constitution tree. This is the Jefferson tree. And he gets stuff from different places in history. And that's his shtick, is history you can hold.
That's kind of a long answer to the question that you asked about how do we determine pricing.
Yeah.
But part of that comes down to, what is our time worth? What is the finished product worth to the customer? What's the cost of the materials and everything else? There's really not an easy answer to that. At the end of the day, and this will sound kind of like a cop-out, I've got this phrase that I use: it's not about the blade, it's about the hand that wields it. As a customer, you have to ask the question, what is the knife worth to you? So whenever I send somebody a price and they say, okay, thanks, I was just checking, and then they reject the offer that I've given them, I don't call them back and go, okay, I'm sorry, I'll cut that price in half. If the knife's not worth that to them, it's probably not really going to be worth that to them.
Yeah.
So that's what the knife is worth to me. So if the knife is worth that to me, and we can agree on what the customer and I value that blade at, then we immediately form a bond that we share. We both understand the value of this piece of artwork. And once we can agree on that, the only place for the value is to go up, because then it becomes a treasured item that they have in their person forever. And then in 20 years, they're going to look at that and they go, I can't believe that's all I paid for this.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
And they're going to pass it down to their kids and their grandkids. So.
And that's the thing, and that, to me, I think you and I kind of talked. That's the selling point. And I don't know about in Canada, but here in the U.S., the family, the kitchen is the central point of the home here in the South of the United States. Everybody's in the kitchen. You're cooking food and you're creating those. That's why I love making chef's knives. That becomes part of that memory. And then the kids get that knife, and then the grandkids get that knife. And so those customers value that stuff. When you've got something that's really high quality, it's handmade, it's made with every maker, a little piece of your soul goes into that thing. And you can really tell when you've done really well is when you hate to see one go out the door.
Oh yeah.
You're holding that thing going, man, I really hate to sell this. But that's how I make a living. And so, you've really, pushed your boundaries. And that was one of the things about, I think you mentioned it on the show, or after the show, you and I were talking. That's the good thing about Forged in Fire, is it forces makers to push their boundaries and realize you can do more than you think you can, and you can do it better than you think you can do it when you're put under the right amount of pressure.
13-inch long Sanmai knives are not intended to be made in 3 hours and finished in 2 more. It's just that's not how it's done.
That's crazy. Nice.
There's a crazy aspect to how when you first start off, you're selling your knives for so cheap because you don't understand the value of what you're doing. And then as you get better, you make them faster, and you start selling them for more. It's like kind of less work goes into it in the long run, and you get more money for it. Whereas in the beginning, you're struggling so hard to try to make something nice and you're making peanuts on it. But then as time goes on, you can charge so much more.
You're onto something there, but I think I saw Britt react here too. I don't think it's the matter that less work goes into it, or even less time goes into it. I find myself actually spending more time and more work on the knives, but there's that skill level.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
When I first started making knives, I mean, the first knife I ever made, I've still got. I forged it out of a piece of rebar, and it's terrible. But it probably took us at least a day or two. So let's just say 16 hours worth of work to make a rebar butter knife. And so in that regard, now in 16 hours, I can make a really nice, high-end 10-inch Damascus chef's knife.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily because I'm putting less work or time into it, but I'm putting a lot more skill
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Well, and it's kind of like, I'll give you an example. My oldest son just graduated from trade school. He got all of his certificates as a welder, comes out of trade school, gets offered a job, $15 an hour. He's fresh out of school. He's got the certificates. He has the skill, but he doesn't have the experience. Same thing when you're going to hire a contractor or you're going to hire, there's a lot of difference between the cost of a guy that's been, laying floor tile for 2 years versus a guy who, with 30 years of experience, that can come in and do the job, and that it's going to be right. It's that skill level as you build those skills and you make a better product. I can remember like the fifth knife I ever forged after taking that class with Jason. I went out to Jason's shop and I handed it to him. I go, "Hey, give me a critique."
Oh no.
Well, and you got to have thick skin to be a knife maker.
Yeah.
Jason looks at this thing and he looks it over and he hands it back to him. Get better.
Well, that sounds about right.
Back to the forge. Yeah.
Yeah, get better. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's what it is. You get better, you get more skill. Your prices.
Yep.
I think we got a comment in the chat from Brad. He's saying you're paying for the knowledge and years of training.
There you go.
And that's what it is.
Illustration that somebody shared with me one time about an electrician who comes to someone's house because they're having a problem. The electrician walks up to the fuse box, and there's a whole panel of fuses. This would have been back in the day. He looks up, pulls out the fuse, puts another fuse in, everything turns back on. He turns around to the customer and says, "That'll be $100." They go, $100? All you did was change a fuse. He goes, "Yeah." They go, "Why is it $100? He said, $2 for the fuse, $98 for knowing what to do."
Yeah, if you've heard the story of the big multi-million-dollar ship that can't get the engine started, so they bring out the guy that designed the ship. He walks in there and he looks around, walks up with a 2-pound ball peen hammer, walks up to the engine, goes, "Pink," and the engine fires right up. He charges them like $2,000 or whatever, and they go, "Swinging a hammer, $2. Knowing where to swing the hammer, that's exactly right. That's
Absolutely.
exactly right."
Yep.
But I think too, there's the other end of that. I know we're talking about this a lot. There's also the risk, and I've seen people do this where, and I hope I never get to this phase where I begin to value my name more than what my name is worth. Where when I start taking a knife that's really only worth $500 and I start trying to charge $5,000, is somebody going to pay it? Yeah, sure. But at the same time, I think every knife maker that I've had the privilege of knowing they want to price their knives to the best of their ability to put them in people's hands. I often say, for me, it's not about money, it's about ministry, it's about sharing life and getting involved in people's lives. And I call what I do not a job or a business, I call it a marketplace ministry. But at the end of the day, if I start pricing my stuff to the point where I see people stop buying it, I cut my prices, because I want to find that sweet spot where people are happy with what they're paying, they're happy with what they're getting, and I'm able to get as much of that out there as possible. And that's the same thing in knife making or any business that you might run. It's a delicate balance, and that's supply, demand, quality, cost, all of those things. It really is for someone who's doing this for a living or even as a serious hobby. It's a dynamic that can be a real struggle for a lot of people, and I've struggled with it in both ways, I suppose.
Well, for me, I guess I could care less if the knife sells. I know what the knife is worth, and I'm not going to sell myself short. There's a buyer out there for every piece, but at the same time, I have to make it. I mean, I tell people all the time, I can't count the number of times I've set bolt upright in bed at 11:45 midnight at night, run out. I keep a drawing pad beside my bed now because I've had this idea, and I'll sketch something out, and then I'll go to the shop the next day and make it. And that's what a lot of my stuff is I'll just make something because I want to make it, and I'll start posting pictures of it, and it sells within 30 minutes.
Nice.
going along the topic of pricing your stuff out, and when do you get to this point of deciding that you're worth more than what you used to be worth? I wanted to throw out a little bit of a saying that we have here in Canada. I don't know if you guys have this. I've heard this in the United States where you are, but in Canada, there's a saying where you can sell ice to Eskimo. Should you sell ice to an Eskimo? No, but you can. You can sell anything you want to anybody if you're willing to put in the effort into selling something to somebody. So at what point as a knife maker do you sit back and be humble to yourself? Because as we all know, that is the best practice in blacksmithing and knife making, is to be humble. But at what point do you sit back and say, you know what, I've put enough effort into this, it's time for me to step up my price point?
You want to take that one?
I think we all struggle with that. I think every one of us, you know, as far as being humbled, all you got to do is pick up an issue of Blade magazine. You know,
absolutely.
Pick up an issue of Blade magazine, pick up an issue of Knives Illustrated, and see what other guys are doing. You know, my first Blade show 2 years ago, there was a kid next to me. He was 18 years old. He'd been making knives for 2 years, and his stuff was stellar. And you know, you start talking to this kid, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you know, he's just a kid." You know, I think that's kind of the neat thing. Knife making is a lot like the gun community. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you show an interest and a passion and a desire to learn, you're on equal footing with, you know, everybody. I don't know a master smith out there that won't give you, you know, give you time, give you tricks, give you tidbits. Other knife makers. Well, as an example, I pointed out on the show one time, there was a Cold Forge episode, and the guy's pipe was off on the bottom. And one of his competitors goes, "Hey man, you know, your thing is off. You know, I want to beat you at your, you know, on equal footing. Mm-hmm. I want to beat you as a better knife maker, but I'm gonna, you know, I'm not a love on you. You know, Billy and I are competitors in that we're both knife makers, but he's one of my dearest friends, and I revel in his success.
And I in his.
You know, if something's out of my wheelhouse and I don't want to do it, I'll go, "Hey, look, I don't really do stuff like that. I don't do Japanese style knives, but I'll refer you to someone who does."
Yeah. And if you watch our episode, I mean, the four of us, the competitors on our episode, we harvested each other's steel.
Yeah,
Robert and I used oxyacetylene torches to take the treads off the tank because he and I were both really comfortable with oxyacetylene. And the other two guys used the die grinders to cut the high carbon off of the handrails. And when I got done harvesting the treads and distributing them, when I got back to my anvil, there was a piece of high carbon steel laying on my anvil. I didn't even have to go get it. They laid it on my anvil for me.
And I cut all the handle material for all three of us in the second round.
Yeah.
And we all harvested the mild and hard. Same thing with my episode. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things in learning when you can go up on your prices or how you should price things and stuff. It's really, really important to not think too highly of yourself than you ought to think. There's this great passage in the Bible where it talks about when you go into a dinner, sit at the lowest table, and then let the master of the house come to you and say, no, this seat is not for you. You come sit up here with me, rather than to go sit at the highest spot and then the guy to come in and go, "What are you doing here? You need to be down there." So there's just, you don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to, but recognizing that when people do value and appreciate your work, after you've made, you know, so many of these knives, you kind of get into a rhythm and a feel of, okay, this is where this should be, this is what this should look like. But understanding, I think first and key in that is, and I've told people this 100 times, if I ever make a perfect knife, I'll stop making knives.
Oh yeah, that doesn't exist.
Because there's not one. I can point out every flaw in every blade I've ever made, and I try my best to remove all of them. But there's things that I know, things that I see that nobody else will ever notice. For generations, they'll look at that knife and go, "Oh, it's the most beautiful knife I own. It's great." And I'll look at that and go, "Yeah, I could have done that a little better." And part of that is like Brent was saying, having a community and a culture of people who are willing to speak truth into your craft. One of my dear friends is a guy by the name of Jerry Drew. Jerry Drew runs GL Drew Knives. He's in Lake Adger, North Carolina. He's about 45 minutes up the road. And Jerry's been doing this for 35 years. He started as stock removal knife maker and then moved into forging. And I remember the first time I was invited to go to Jerry's shop. And I went into Jerry's shop and I didn't make anything. Jerry made a knife and I stood there and I watched Jerry make a knife. And I was there for maybe an hour. And then I came home, went right to my shop and did exactly what I watched Jerry do. And in that 1 hour, my grinding skills improved, I tell everybody, by about 400%.
Oh, yeah.
Just from the experience of watching someone who knew how to do what I was already doing so much better, that even just watching them and learning from them. So I think part of that is knowing where you're at and being honest about it, but also recognizing there's always room to grow, right? I hope to someday be regularly selling knives that are in the $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 range. I'll always have a $100 knife or so, but I'd like to be at the quality where people would value my product at that level. But I realize there's a lot of work, there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of skill, and there's still a lot of training in me to get to the place where I can do some of the stuff. And I love looking at other Smiths' work and going, wow, I wish I knew how they did that, because that drives me to be more creative in what I do.
Yeah, I agree. And it is, it's impossible to, I mean, you just kind of look at your overall quality and what it takes and go, okay, I think this knife is worth this. And a lot of times, I'll send pictures to other friends. Hey, what do you think this is worth? What should I sell this at? And, I get a lot of, is that all? As well. So, is that all?
That's a good feeling.
Yeah, it is. It's a great feeling when you hear somebody go, "Oh, I paid twice for that."
Yeah, it's kind of like dancing on the edge of a razor blade. Really, it is. You're trying to guess at what something is worth without, and I talking about getting full of yourself. I remember I read something or somebody told it to me. It's been in my mind for decades. And somebody goes, next time you think you're really important, try ordering some other guy's dog around. So I try to be very, very, very humble because I'm nobody.
Well,
there's always
speaking on that though, there's a level of humbleness that you have to be very careful with allowing yourself to ascertain, because at one point being humble is extremely important, but you get to a point, and the reason I bring this up is because this is where I made a knife 3 years ago. I forged it out. I started grinding out the bevels on it, and I got to a point where I started looking at other people's work, and I said, I am no knife maker. I have no place in this industry. I need to step back and learn what the hell I'm doing before I even try. That knife is still sitting on my bench. That was 3 years ago, I think I made that. And it's still sitting there waiting for me to finally finish it one day when I pick up the balls and get the, the courage to say, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to go forward with this.
So I'm going to go completely off the rails here and quote some anime. There's a great anime called Assassination Classroom. If you've never seen it, you need to look it up. And the teacher in this anime, his name is Koro Sensei. And I've got a little sign that when I was a school teacher, I had on my wall, and it was a quote from Koro Sensei, and it says, "The master has failed more times than the novice has tried." And that's just a really great way of looking at it. If all I did was compare what I do with other Smiths, I'm never going to get there. There are people in this world that are good enough right now that if I make knives for the rest of my life, I will not achieve the level of skill that they have. I have to recognize that. They started earlier. They were born with more natural skill in that area. They had better training, better experience. For whatever reason, there are people who are already better than I ever will be. And if I happen to be that one guy who manages to, at some point, be the very best there ever was, then I'll be thankful for the opportunity to do that. But realistically, that's probably not going to be me. But at the same time, I didn't get into this industry because this was kind of, I never expected this. I've got a master's degree in English literature. I was a school teacher, a college professor. I liked what I did for a living. I loved being in the classroom. But my career in knife making grew out of the knives that I was making were in such high demand that I either had to stop selling them or stop teaching full time. And I had the fortunate choice of choosing between two very good things. And so I chose to work for myself rather than to work for somebody else. And that was really the kind of the driving idea behind it, is that I get to get up every day, go out into my shop, and I treat this like a job. I mean, I start at 9 a.m., I work till 5 p.m. At the last half hour of every day, I take time to clean up, just like the boss would tell me to clean up if he was here, even though I'm the boss. So I treat it that way. But again, it's not necessarily about being the best knife maker in the world. It's not about running the best business or making the most money. Think about it more like running a marathon or doing a triathlon. It's not about beating your competitors. It's about every knife you make being better than the last knife you made.
That's it right there. Get better, a little bit better tomorrow than I was today.
I am so much better now than I was. I've been making knives for 3.5 years. And in that time, God's allowed me to go from never making a knife to being a full-time knife maker. And the stuff that I'm making now is I never dreamed I'd be able to make it. But I know that the stuff I'll be making in 5 years will put the stuff I'm doing now to shame.
Sure.
So it's always about not beating the other people or comparing yourself to them. It's about making something better than the last thing that you made. And if people want to buy that, great. If not, do it for the love of the craft.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, just be better than you were yesterday.
Yeah.
Every night's better. Every night's a little bit better. Ground better, finished better, handled better, balanced better, something.
Yeah. I showed you those two that I made that are in the kitchen. I should have brought them out here. I taught a class today. We finished the class today. So I had two guys in here. We forged the knives last night. We put them in the tempering oven about 11 o'clock last night. We're back in here at 9 a.m. this morning and finished them up by 1 o'clock. And so we made 4 knives. I made 2, they made 2. And I got to looking at these 2 knives that I had forged last night. I was like, dang, these are pretty good. They almost match perfectly. They're completely forged by hand, no power tools. I don't use the power hammer in the class, really. So I was like, dang, I was showing my wife, and she looked at me, she kind of smiled. She said, yeah, you're getting pretty good at this. Yeah. And I go, well, I'm better than I was.
Yeah.
So it's always exciting to me. And that's why I got into this. I got into it because I like learning new things. I've been a woodworker. I've been a locksmith. I've built houses. I've done all kinds of different jobs. And for me, knife making, blacksmithing has always been called the king of crafts because you can do anything if you can blacksmith. But for me, knife making takes all of the skills that I've accumulated in the 30 plus different jobs that I've worked in my life, and it puts them all into one craft. I've got metalworking, I've got woodworking, I've got artistry, I've got, I do a lot of my drawings on a computer, so I've got computer drafting and design and stuff like that. Leathercraft, that's a whole different thing. Metallurgy. Oh, it's
Jeez.
There's so much, and there's never space to stop learning.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with you guys. It never ends. The maker's craft world is something that once you dive into it, you're either in for it for the long haul, or you get scared and you dive away from it and you never touch it again. It's one or the other. I'm so glad that you guys have taken the time out of your days to show us the love that you have for the craft, the effort that you've put into it. Thank you so much for showing us your shop and explaining everything you've explained to us. We've actually gone over the time limit that we had set aside for you guys, but regardless, it was completely worth it as far as I'm concerned. Thank you so much, Billy and Britt, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
thank you very much. We're very, very happy that you guys were able to help us out and share your knowledge and your passion for the craft and the way that you pass on your work to help others as well is really commendable. So
Absolutely. Shameless plug. Feel free to reach out to either of us and ask questions. Britt Barnes Knives on Facebook.
And Instagram.
And Instagram.
And YouTube.
I haven't done the YouTube thing yet. Billy Salyers or Yellow Rose Forge on Facebook and Instagram. We're always happy to help people who are growing in the craft, answer questions, and meet folks and talk knives.
awesome. Love it, guys.
Well,
Thank you very much.
Hey, everybody. Good to see everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Awesome to
You
meet you guys. Okay, Justin, up next, we have a little bit of an unannounced special guest coming up.
Yeah.
This is something that we tried to line up a little bit beforehand, but didn't really get it quite panned out, and it looks like it ended up panning out anyways. We're going to continue going on. Maybe, do you want to give a little bit of details on the knife contest before we go through with this? Another shout out to Pritchell and Hardy for giving us some prizes to give out, for sponsoring the event. Thompson Metal for sponsoring the event. We got some prizes from them. And C2 Craft, Center for Crafts, for helping us out with their Zoom account here. We've got a contest coming up with some spikes. We want to see you guys make some cool stuff and maybe win some prizes.
Yeah, so let's, I'm going to introduce Thack Ironworks is also here today. We messaged back and forth a few times and we never really got lined up, but I guess things cleared up.